Thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. It's a very, very important topic, which is very current in terms of various things you'll be seeing and hearing about from the media. But there is a lot of misinformation and miseducation about reparations, to the point that for particularly, for many people, they completely veer off the substance of the matter. Reparations is not a new thing. Many peoples of the world, for various harms done in the past and in the present, have battled for it, and it's been kind of enshrined also in international law in terms of the United Nations, framework, which Robin spelled out, and I don't want to go over that. In terms of, cessation, guarantees of non-repetition, restitution, compensation, satisfaction. We can expand on this in the conversation. But I want to emphasize reparations as we understand it from a Pan-African liberatory perspective. And this is important because, first of all, the harm of chattel enslavement and, its offshoots, such as direct colonization and now, neo-colonialism, were actually meted out to African people. And a huge part of that is that up till now, there is a refusal to give African people the opportunity, in terms of the masses of our people who suffered this and who are still living, the consequences of it in what we call the prolonging Maangamizi, the intentional destructive harm that was done and continues to be done, to us. We first and foremost recognize the greatest of all harms done not only to us, but to all of humanity, as dehumanization. The criminality of what happened in totality has severely damaged our humanity to the point of robbing us of it. And the process of reparations, first and foremost, highlighting our fundamental worldview rooted in Ubuntu, rooted in, us being human through other people's, humanity, means that the first task is to recognize how much of our humanity has been damaged to the point of losing it. And then working consciously to gain the kind of consciousness and self-empowerment and self-determination that allows us to work at regaining our humanity. And I'm choosing my words very carefully there. Humanity is not something you regain by just wishing for it. It is also not something you even can gain if you are in denial of the fact that, this whole historical phenomenon has so damaged you and everybody else that it will take working together to reclaim, that humanity. And in that humanity is expressed in terms of how we relate to each other in equity, in decency, in mutual respect, and build a kind of relationships that will enable us to live, together and enjoy whatever there is, that Mother Earth has to offer us. And that for me is the key thing that gets missed out, not just by people's racialized as white, but also by people racialized as non-white. And even a lot of Africans lose sight of this and reduce it when there's conversational reparations. People will talk about money and follow the media, it's misinformation agenda. But this is fundamentally what it is. And this battle for the reclaiming of our common humanity and the material basis, for it, which is, the redistribution of wealth, right, has been going on from, generation upon generation with, African people, championing this. The best of our sheroes and heroes, are noted for championing this cause. But of course, it's not just African, sheroes and heroes. There are those from European, communities, from communities racialized as white, who have also done tremendous work, in this, and who really are completely, ignored and left out, and in fact remain unknown largely, within communities racialized, but even those that claim to be radical. Okay, and when the time comes, I can give you some of these, names that are very, very outstanding as far as we are concerned, not just during the period of resistance to chattel enslavement, but also during the anti-colonial struggle, against direct colonialism, and of course, continues in the struggles, of African people against neocolonialism, today. I would want to, for now, just end on highlighting the fact that for us, this reclaiming of our humanity in order to encourage and inspire others also to do the same is crystallized in the concreteness of what we call Mat Ubuntu Man in Ubuntu Dunia. So planet repairs, this nexus of reparatory justice, environmental justice, and cognitive justice, which again we can explain, if the need arises to do that. It is concretized for us in the rebuilding of our homeland of Africa, regaining and rebuilding our homeland of Africa, in its full sovereignty as what we call a Mat Ubuntu Man, a Pan-African union of communities of resistance, rooted in the worldview of Ma'at and practicing Ubuntu amongst themselves in relation to other peoples. And this Mat Ubuntu Man can only exist concretely, in a pluriversal world of shared power, and equity amongst nations that we call Ubuntu Dunia. That is the concrete form of it. And particularly in the diaspora, work on this is happening in terms of building what we call Mat Ubuntu Jammers, that are African heritage communities for national self-determination that connect to what we call Sankofa Homes, indigenous communities in Africa that are also in the process of rediscovering their humanity and linking up with, those across the continent, and those in the diaspora in an exercise that we call rematration, returning ourselves to Mother Earth, right? That we know in various forms as Miano, as Nana Sasea, and so on. Well, the International Social Movement for African Reparations is how we call the wide diversity of African groups and even individuals, both on the continent of Africa and everywhere else in the world, who are working for the achievement of African reparations in the various ways in which they currently understand it. Okay. And this is a very loose, informal, wide range of groups that have, in certain cases, even contrary viewpoints on what reparations, should mean. But what they have in common is that they recognize the importance of campaigning, and in a certain sense, we would also say freedom fighting for reparatory justice for African people. They are devoting some time to doing something about it. And they're still in the process of reaching out to each other and building some kind of, unity to harmonize perspectives and to also shape themselves into a much more stronger, effective, and victorious force. There is that desire there. Okay. You will find people, African people, who would tell you that reparations, either they don't know anything about it or they are not even interested in it. And some who would say there is no point about it. But the ISMA, people who belong to the ISMA, as far as our conception of it in the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe and, Stop the Maangamizi Campaign is concerned, is this very, very wide global array, of groupings amongst African people who believe that there is a case for reparations and are defining it and working on it in various ways and trying to achieve, some purposes that they've set for themselves, right? There are various tendencies within the ISMA. There are revolutionary tendencies that think that this fundamentally is about the transformation of the world from what it is at the moment, not just the transformation of Africa and African communities, the transformation of the entire world. And to Stop the Maangamizi Campaign, and its networks belong to that tendency. There are others who think that, you don't need any transformation of anything. Just give us the money. It's all about money, and once we get money, we'll be able to do what we feel like doing, So that is also there. There are others who think it is about returning to Africa, particularly it's very strong in the Rastafarian, movement, concept of reparations as a repatriation to Africa. And yeah, there's so many others, that just think that, yeah. But the main tendencies are those who think that it is about the fundamental transformation of Africa and the world, and they hold on to the strategy and tactics of Matubuntu Man and Ubuntu Dunia. There are those who think that it is just about money, that is really what it boils down to, and that is what the media drums up. And you see, particularly those around the Caribbean, community of states called CARICOM, that's really, their thing. Then, of course, those who think that it is just about African people being retained or returning themselves to the continent of Africa through repatriation, exercises, and that is largely the Rastafarian, tendency, within it. But the international social movement for African reparations, from the perspective of the Stop the Maangamizi Campaign and associated networks, is inconceivable without what we call the People's Reparations International Movement, without all other communities organizing themselves in pursuit of reparatory justice, in particular, and planet repairs in general. The objectives of the international social movement for African reparations, will not be achieved, right? So for us, the ISMA, is interlinked indivisibly with what we call the PRIM, that is the People's Reparations International Movement. For me, that really is the point I want to emphasize in answering the question of where to begin. We have the slogan, education is preparation for reparations. Because without trying to acquire the experiential learning, the knowledge from experiential learning that African people and humanity as a whole, have accumulated, through fighting to defend, and when it was lost, to reclaim their humanity, we're not going to progress anymore. And I think that one of the biggest disservices that particularly, people racialized as white do to themselves is accepting the lie, the big lie of the establishment, that, anything to do with reparations, has to evoke guilt amongst all people racialized as white. And therefore, it's a topic that they should shy away from and not even, seek knowledge about, because eventually, all of them are going to be put in the dock, right? This is, for me, the biggest lie that most people racialized as white internalize to their own detriment. Because what is lost, is the story, the remarkable our story, we will say, that both peoples racialized as white and peoples racialized as non-white created together in resistance to the phenomenon of chattel enslavement and where it came from, the colonial mindset. Many people will not know about Thomas and Lydia Hardy, who led the London I think it was called a London Corresponding Society of Working People, right? And were the ones who actually gave refuge to the likes of Cubuano and Equiano when they were building the Sons of Africa as an African community organization of enslaved and, freed, Africans, in Britain, right? People don't know about Mary Wollstonecraft, don't know about Mary Escially of Bristol, the Joseph MacDonald, of Wales. All these people who, and many in Scotland, including school children, who at that time, when again the Oxbridge, dawns, and the entire institution, academic and political and economic, of the establishment, were saying that, Africans were not human beings. Ordinary people, racialized as white, in their slums, fought against this idea and resisted it en masse, and it is that struggle of ordinary people and the threat it posed to the start when various forces were coalescing together. Because people like Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Escially, saw in the condition of enslaved Africans the enslavement of women in Britain, and drew women into that battle against chattel enslavement, because they saw that it was necessary to create an alliance between enslaved Africans and, what they saw as enslaved female, females, in order to challenge the oppression of the entire establishment. Now, this is completely, airbrushed out of, the history of even the abolitionist movement. The abolitionist movement, was joined by the likes of William Wilberforce, indeed, to effect a movement capture from the top, so as to diffuse the abolitionist movement of its, grassroots revolutionary, substance. Because it did pose such a threat, because it was unifying, peoples across the world, particularly in the aftermath of the Haitian Revolution, and its victory in 1804, right? So we need to get into this history, and unless people, go back to the ordinary men and women, both racialized as Black and racialized as white, who tried to overcome these artificial, divisions in order to build solidarity from below and transform themselves. This was happening across the world. The internationalism of the abolitionist movement is something that we miss. But it was a global justice movement, unifying people across continents. And it was the power of that demonstrated, particularly in the victory of the Haitian Revolution, that made establish some of the establishment elements to begin to rethink about this notion of Africans not being human, and recognizing their humanity, and then wanting to make concessions so as to safeguard, the establishment. This is the true history. And unless, that's why the beginning of it for me, for particularly those of you who are racialized as white, and young people particularly, is go onto the trail of your abolitionist heroes and heroes and start from there, and then get into those like Sylvia Pankhurst, right? Who bridged both the abolitionist, the movement of resistance against chattel enslavement, and the movement against colonialism, and bring it from there, and the likes of Basil Davidson, bring it from there into those like June Milne, who led, who from here the fight against neocolonialism, colonialism and neocolonialism. And then you will see that literally thousands of sheroes and heroes from communities racialized as white across the world, who were in the same trenches of freedom fighting, of course from different positions, but making huge sacrifices. And in the making of those huge sacrifices, those peoples, both those racialized as non-white and those racialized as white, were beginning to work at regaining their humanity, which was the strength that carried them further and further and further, to win, concessions and upon concessions. So where to begin is precisely action learning in terms of going on the trail of these sheroes and heroes, both racialized as Black and racialized as white, and then see what ordinary human beings, knowing their humanity was being destroyed by a system that, gave them nothing except to pit them against other human beings and to make profits for a privileged few, when they found their unity in the need to stop their dehumanization and to assist each other through international solidarity in regaining their humanity, and then pitting that humanity against those who were inhuman. That power was what transformed, the world, at the times that it did. And if you see what people did, including school children here, then you will see the possibilities of what the power of people in struggle to regain their humanity can achieve. So reparations is not about money. If you go off the tangent of money and lose the substance of what it is, the fight of people to assert their humanity, then you miss everything about it. The starting point really is precisely what you've done, right? Joseph Sturge, from your, local area, Gloucestershire, right? Let people go into the history, the local history of the abolitionist movement. Start from there. It was such a massive movement, right? That it touches every family in this country. And you are certain to find, once you start, for example, go further into the history of Sturge. Who was he? Who did he work with? Who associated with him? And so on and so forth. And then you begin to discover so many things. It must be about local history, because then you can see who, from precisely where you are right now, who made this history possible, and bring them back into our spaces, right? to replace the false heroes that we have been given, right? Let those, people be seen in your schools, in your churches, in your, playgrounds, and so put their images around. It jogs people's memory, right? And that is what will make people who can see, oh, so this is our local history and we don't know this. This historical, feats were made in this very locality by people and we don't know. And then more of those names will come out and the connections across the country will come out, right? And that's really where to start, because there's nothing more than showing people who have been made. And then let me take this now to that question. What changed? People who have been made to forget their own history, what people like them did in those same localities, right? That transformed the world. If you forget that, if you have no memory of that, if you cannot associate your immediate surroundings to these things that change the world, then you buy into the lie that, first of all, ordinary people are not the makers of history. It is the kings and queens and lords and ladies and baronesses and so on who make history. They're the only ones who have the power to change things. And therefore, do as they say. And try to emulate them. Become as selfish and brutal and self-seeking, as they are. And in that sense, you continue to destroy even the little iotas of the humanity that you're born with. What changed in this country is a great injustice of making people believe that, nothing good that people could stand and be proud of as humane came out of people racialized as white. If you believe that lie, then your whole notion of whiteness leads you to a destroyed humanity. And you carry that and, reproduce that all along. And that's when you have this sense of, I'm a sinful person and I'm incapable of any good. And the only thing I can do is continue being who I'm meant to be. But that is not true, right? And once we can defeat this, we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. If we can begin to work together and, rediscover even the little good that is in, people around us and in ourselves, and work to maximize that, to overcome our weaknesses we all have, right? And be inspired by the real history of real people like us who lived and walked this earth, particularly in the communities where we are. Then that enables us to rediscover who we truly are, and more importantly, who we still can be. And then in that reaching out to other people who are also on that same journey, we become the force that will transform ourselves and transform the world away from this predation that is being dictated to us by the acts of inhumanity of a few that are done in our name, and we have become complicit in it because we cannot challenge it with the very, examples from our own community's history. But because for me, there are two important things. There are a couple of things I want to say in terms of concretely what PRIM building will amount to. Okay. And that is what faces us. We are, as Africans, we're involved in developing the ISMA, and we need the PRIM work also to advance in earnest, particularly here in this country, where we now have a group calling itself, the heirs of slavery. These are people who've inherited wealth, from those, of their forebears who were part of the plantocracy, who were enslavers, right, and owned, property, dispossessed from people, in the colonies. And they now created a group, to engage with the ISMA, which they call the heirs of slavery. And then CARICOM, the Caribbean Community of States, is trying to misuse them for its own purposes of reducing reparations only to money. And that endangers us, right? The simple thing about it is that if that conversation becomes one about just money, okay, which CARICOM is putting its governmental power and state power behind, and the heirs of slavery as a group of people racialized as white from the plantocracy are now trying to drive that agenda. You know what is definitely going to happen, right? We're going to have the far right forces use this to, create scaremongering narratives and then build their forces that will only serve the purposes of fascism against, people racialized as Black and racialized as white, who are talking reparations in order to effect it in planet repairs. This is the danger that is here and now. It is not tomorrow. So the reparations narratives and work is an emergency issue, because this is now being driven so hard with the propaganda of CARICOM, now with even, business tycoons putting their money behind this narrative. And you know that to the ordinary person in this country, it's like we have a cost of living crisis. We have so many problems, and then this, let me put it very frankly, these niggers who can't get their act together are coming to pressurize our governments to take large chunks and just give it to them to go and squander. And yes, it will be squandered if it goes to CARICOM. And the kind of governments that we have today, in most parts of the continent and diaspora of Africa, right? So this is why the PRIM building, through the kind of efforts that you're making, the PRELA has a role in that. The crime scene, school as a crime scene, operation also has a place in that. If that is seen as a PRIM building effort, where more is about, for me, it's about saying that stop education being a school crime scene, right? That is really the focus. So you're not saying, school as a crime scene for it to be misunderstood that you're against education. You're saying education should stop being done in schools that are crime scenes, and let's rebuild spaces of learning, where people can, first of all, learn about our shared, history of battling for our humanity, right? And that it will be a PRIM building of, and then we can all, both people racialized as Black and people racialized as white, sing from the same hymn share, say, We are not starting reparations, conversations with money. So no to the CARICOM agenda, no to that attempt to just pit us against each other over money. Take money out of the conversation at this point. The most important thing is stopping miseducation being carried out in schools that are crime scenes. That's a common task for us all. And then you can link schools, people, young people who are working on this, supported by adults who are working on battling to stop education being done in school crime scenes and transform educational spaces to be about planet repairs. They can then link up with those that we know in Ghana, we know in Africa, we know in other parts, in for example, Colombia, that are working on this. And the PRIM comes alive as a unity of people racialized as Black and racialized as white who are saying, we are not going to start this conversation on reparations, as something about money. That is an urgent task that we can put you in RYSE, in Sister, together with those we have, in Ghana working on right now, and spread that across schools, colleges, and universities.
Not so much a question, it's more deep gratitude to Brother Kofi for everything you've said. I came into this room not sure what would happen, and everything I've written down, you've answered fully in the way that I would have hoped for. So I want to bless you for being here, bring what you bring, those insights, and a bit of sadness in myself. I'm 62, and I'm from a working class background, and my whole early adulthood was thinking and being the way Kofi's talking. I'm just thinking, what happened? How did we lose that? The solidarity, the working classes with other oppressed peoples across the world has always been a massive thing. And the collaboration with the middle and the upper classes who want to see social change in collaboration with the working classes was such a part of my story of growing up. And I'm deeply sad that that seems to have just fallen away. I'd studied sociology and politics and philosophy at college, and we were steeped in the story of lifting ourselves up out of tyrannical oppression and making things better for everybody. This was how we talked about things, because it raises the spirit, it gives us hope, and it gives us faith in a better future, because we've done it before and we can do it again. So I was thinking, how has this changed? So I just wonder your reflections, Kofi. What changed? I think my question is sort of, what is it do you think changed, Kofi? Because you seem like an elder too. And is it something to do with how social movements weaponize white Western Christian guilt? We are born into sin, into original sin. We might find salvation in heaven if we're good. But the fundamental premise is we're born into sin, and we're just, when I was a kid, we were just one step away from going to hell. And it took me 2 decades to get that out of my body system. If I'm bad, I'm going to hell. And if I'm good, I'll go to heaven. It's such an all-power. And I think what's happening is social movements weaponize white Christian psyche with shame, guilt, and disgust. And we turn on ourselves with shame, hate, self-hatred, and disgust. And we cannot lift our humanity up without healing that in ourselves, to reach out with love and kindness to everybody, ourselves and other people. That's my reflections.
We were talking about that quote of the about the lie, moving away from the lies that ordinary people don't write history. We were talking about that a bit in our group.
Yeah, I absolutely love that.
Yeah, it was so good. We've got it down here in red, and outlined
it so many times. It's like the highlight of the notes.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was also there's 3 of us now, but there was about 10 young people all here listening. And so just like, thank you, Kofi, for coming to talk. It was amazing to like hear and to listen, and it was so cool to just have a big group of us down here watching it. It was really nice. Yeah.
Thank you too. Thank you.
Cool. I think that's all our feedback.
You just say some of the things we talked about are kind of expanding a bit more globally. Like I've got family in Palestine, and then what reparations would look like in the Middle East, what would be the similarities and differences? Because there wasn't like I haven't done enough learning about history, but it wasn't as much slavery, but there's maybe economic colonialism and kind of like how things differ or similar in terms of just linking humanity. Also talked about like the recurring things that happen in history, like learning from waves of technology, and how with every wave of technology there comes similar like battles of communication and battles of misinformation and resistance. Talked about how like questioning how much more we understand humanity now. Like I feel like we seem to be at a point maybe where we in the street accept more people visibly, and then how deep that acceptance is and who it applies to, and whether distance physically makes it harder to accept people's humanity, even if in theory like we live in an equal society like is a ideal. Some thoughts and ideas. Again, thank you, Robin and Kofi and everyone else for lots of amazing ideas.
Yeah, we had a really wide-ranging chat. And yeah, I think some of the main things that kind of came up for was like to not look for guidance outside of ourselves, and that thing about waiting for we don't have to wait. We shouldn't be waiting for the establishment to move, because it's not going to in the right direction, and to go about how do we go about pushing back the narrative and like the capture of the narrative around reparations, and the thing about concessions as well, like how do we because like the history of like the establishment in the UK has been like it'll give just enough concession to avoid violent revolt, but like how do we like prevent that from prevent them kind of perpetuating the miseducation, and looking at Stroud. And we were also talking about the fact that, you know, Joseph, it was really amazing to hear about Joseph Sturge, but like there's like you're saying, there's so many people connected to him that haven't gotten their stories told, and for example around people who couldn't write and read and write, and how that impacts the archive and who gets written down and passed on, and the different ways in which we can tell the stories like beyond the written word, and what would that look like in Stroud and beyond. So yeah, thank you so much, Kofi, and yeah, it was really powerful stuff.
Thank you. What you've said right now is that very, very powerful as well, amongst the other things that have been said, because I think that, you know, that's why I said, take just a Sturge, right? Look at who were around them, the people who couldn't read, you know, and write, you know, but whose histories you could bring out in terms of what is there, you know, that, you know, would bring them alive. Everything that is there, you know, where his farm was, who were his farm workers, the records will be there, just like you can find records of enslaved Africans. The records of those people will be there, you know, and you could recreate, you know, those people and bring them back, you know, into the history, because he certainly worked with, you know, with people, you know, and that is really something that you should do. Also, in terms of particularly the school is a crime scene thing, how you could really bring it alive. For me, I would suggest that this campaign, you know, could really, really be concretized for people if some teachers who are willing, but also if, you know, young people who are in schools argue for a day where they use the school premises to run classes on things that they want, or even go out. It's just like the story that we've heard. Go out into their communities, to learn in their communities, to visit historical sites, you know, the very grounds that people are Joseph Sturge and his workers, on his farms, the very grounds they walk. Let's go back into there and make that a lesson. It could be not just history, it could be geography, it could be economics, it could be, everything else, right? And that is something that will bring the school is a crime scene, thing more concretely alive. The day, students in these schools decide that this is a day we're going to go out into our communities and learn differently from sitting down in classrooms, to be taught. That is these are the sort of things that should be encouraged. And you could have a day where you say, let's transform this whole school today into how schools look like in Palestine, right? And let's engage with young people in schools in Palestine on that day, in terms of collaboration. Schools in Ghana, schools in Jamaica, schools in Colombia. These are the practical things that Prela needs to do to make the schools as crime scene thing different, because it is really about the efforts that young people and teachers who support them to show that education can be different from what it is right now. And they can teach themselves. They can organize themselves to teach each other and learn differently.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in and say thank you so much again to Kofi for all you've brought this evening. And I think the thing I'm reflecting on is about also like how to kind of bring this home to like myself in a way, and to kind of acknowledge, like, part of this process is about acknowledging where I feel dehumanized and where I dehumanize myself, like in terms of like being disconnected from the body, or like, yeah, excluding myself or feeling disconnected from community, and how I kind of have my own sort of internalized capitalist or and my kind of disconnection from my sort of ancestors, and how that is also part of the process of reparations towards myself, and how this the multi layers of how this kind of colonization is still happening within oneself and community and around the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kofi. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Much love, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.